Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture, we're going to discuss statistics in sociology. Now, statistics in sociology will kindly talk about the relevance of quantitative research methods. And we know that in sociology, we make an attempt to study all kinds of phenomena, large scale societies, comparative study, and we do a lot of surveys, census, data collection, and therefore we need to understand the relevance of statistics in sociology. So, when we go to understand the discipline of sociology before we understand statistics, let us try to understand the nature of the discipline of sociology. And as we are all aware of as students of sociology, that sociology is the scientific study of modern industrial society. And sociologists kind of ask a number of questions. And these questions are basically to understand the different dimensions of society. Some of the examples of questions raised by sociologists are: what determines how well people succeed in life, occupationally and otherwise? Second, what factors affect variation in crime rates between different countries, cities, and neighborhood? Another question raised by sociologists is: what are the causes of increase in divorce rates in the past generation in the United States? What are the main factors driving fertility decline in developing countries? Why have some revolutions been successful in some countries but not in others? So, if we look at these questions are trying to understand different rates, increase, decline, the pattern, and here is where quantitative data becomes important, and to understand the pattern, to understand the sequence in events are changing or are affecting society, statistics becomes important. So, if we go back to the entire evolution of sociology and understand why they are raising this question, we need to go back to the basic of emergence of sociology, where the main concern of most sociologists was to understand the new social order, an order which was emerging with the growth of our urban industrial cities. And here we know that in mid 18th thinkers like Auguste Comte, Karl Marx, Weber, Durkheim, and these are some of the thinkers that we have already kind of discussed in different series. These thinkers are the founding fathers of sociology. They all, in their own ways, tried to understand the profound social changes that was being caused by industrialization, capitalism, and urbanization. Now, when the sociologists are making sense of such large scale transformations, the rate of change, the rate of decline, or the rate of increase of certain phenomena or certain kind of patterns become significant to this discipline of sociology. Now, the work of all the founding sociologists were focused on new forms of social order, conflict, and solidarity appearing in industrial society, and laid the theoretical foundation for later sociological research. From its beginning, sociology used numerical data, but these data were often incomplete and inconsistent. So, we look into the phases in which the quantitative data was used in sociology. So, before World War II, quantitative analysis usually relied on basic descriptive statistics with limited capacity to model complex relationships. After World War II, governments and research institutions generated much larger and more detailed data sets, including census, large scale survey, and longitudinal stage, because war had a large scale transformation on the society, and there was several kind of phenomena that need to be captured through quantitative study. So, in response to the large scale transformations taking place, sociologists developed more advanced statistical technique such as multivariate regression, log linear models, and event history analysis to study social process with greater precision. Over the second half of the 20th century, the discipline of sociology moved towards more explicit hypothesis formulation, systematic research design, and sophisticated statistical modeling. Major sociology journals increasingly expected rigorous quantitative analysis, integrating formal models and complex data into mainstream sociological work. Over the last 50 years, statistical methods have helped make sociological research more precise, transparent, and testable, raising the standard of scientific rigor. So, it kind of helps us to undo with the assumption that sociology does only qualitative study or it's only kind of dealing with observations and descriptions. Sociology to large scale is also engaged in quantitative research where statistics becomes one of the main technique to do data analysis. In this lecture, we are going to refer to Adrian Rafteray's article Statistics in Sociology 1915 to 2000. This article was published in the Journal of American Statistical Association, and the author here reviews the successful integration of statistical method into sociology over the later half of the 20th century, which led to improved scientific rigor in the discipline. Now, Rafteray in his work highlights the evolution of statistical methods in sociology through three generations. Like he traces the evolution of statistics in sociology over the time period, and with changing time he kind of focuses on the changing method, and statistics becomes more complicated and the use of statistics becomes more in terms of new methods and new ways of understanding society. So, adoption of statistical method contributed significantly to a more rigorous scientific standard in sociological research. Statistical methods have had a successful half century in sociology, contributing to a greatly improved standard of scientific discipline, and it has made use of wide range of statistical method. Here, Rafteray focuses on the ones developed by sociologists motivated by sociological problems or first published in sociological journals. And in this article, Statistics in Sociology, Rafteray distinguishes three post-war generations of statistical method in sociology, each determined by the kind of data it addresses. So, the three generations of statistics are defined by the type of data that they were developed to address. The first generation, which emerged in the late 1940s onwards, that is starting after the World War II, deals with cross tabulations of counts from survey and census. Now, this was a time when there was again an increased rate of industrialization, urbanization, and therefore, lot of focus was on studying the social mobility. So, the example of the cross tabulation is the social mobility tables that were used by sociologists. Now, this generation, that is the first generation of methods sociologists, used few categorical variables such as sex, age, class, occupation, and social mobility. The key methods included measures of association and log linear models, an area where sociology made significant contribution to statistics. Then we move to the second generation. The second generation, that is 1960 onwards, that is starting early 1960, deals with unit level data from survey that includes many variables. This generation was galvanized by Blau and Duncan highly influential book The American Occupational Structure, that is 1967, and by the establishment of sociological methodology in 1969 and sociological method and research in 1972 as publications outlet. The second methods developed marked the coming of age of research on quantitative methodology in sociology. Then we have the third generation, which is also kind of known as the LISREL type. There were a lot of use of kind of linear models, event history analysis, and these allowed for analyzing the turning of events, for example, marriage, job change. The third generation, 1980 onwards, emerged to handle data that did not fit traditional matrices such as text or narratives or data where dependence was crucial. Here, some of the techniques used for data collections were spatial or social networking data. A lot of use of textual data, history, events history, etc. These methods allowed sociologists to study processes, sequence, and interdependence or more directly than earlier cross-sectional approaches. Now, when we look into the three generations of data that evolved from 1940s to till the date, it's important to understand what is the relevance of statistics today. So much sociological research is based on reanalysis of large, high-quality survey sample data set, usually collected with public fund and publicly available to researcher with typical sample size in the range of 5,000 to 20,000. This has opened the way to easy replication of result and has helped to produce standards of scientific rigor in sociology comparable to those in many of the natural sciences. Social statistics is expanding rapidly as a research area, and several major institutions have recently launched initiatives in this area. Now, if we were to look into the three generation of data methods that we discussed, we see that each generation used different techniques or there were different types of data analysis. And here we have a kind of a classification of the three generation. The first that we talked about was the first generation, which was cross tabulation. Here there are basically two subtypes. One was the categorical data analysis and the second was hypothesis testing and model selection. In the second generation, that is the unit level survey data, there were three subtypes which methods were used. One was measuring the occupational status, number two was the structural model equation, and the third was event history analysis. And then we come to the third generations, which was new data, new challenges and new methods, in which we will be talking about social network and the development of new methods of quantitative data collection. Now, let us understand the two subtypes within the first generation. So, as we have already discussed that the first generation research method was basically cross tabulation. Initially, much of the data that quantitative sociologists had to work came in form of cross-classified table, and so it is not surprising that this is perhaps the area of statistics to which sociology has contributed the most. The most important application was the analysis of social mobility tables, which are two-way tables cross-classifying a father's occupational category, that is the origin, against the respondent's occupational category, that is the destination. Now, again, why were these social mobility tables relevant in sociology was because again the same kind of an understanding that there was a large scale of migration from say rural areas to industrial areas, and therefore to understand the mobility, social mobility was very important to understand the pattern of social change that was taking place. So, you had the father's occupation as the origin, and then to see whether there has been mobility. The second variant was to understand the respondent's occupational status. Now, these tables typically used between 5 and 17 occupational categories. So, these were the methods of statistical data collection in the 1940s till 1960s, and at first the focus was on measure of association or mobility indices as they were called in the social mobility context. Glass 1954, Rogo 1953 are some of the references that use the social mobility tables. However, these indices were criticized for failing to successfully separate structural mobility from exchange or circulation mobility. Structural mobility refers to change in the overall occupational structure, while exchange mobility refers to the movement of individual holding the structure constant. The second development of the first generation, that is cross tabulation, was the long linear model, which was developed by Birch in 1963. Proposal of the long linear model treated all counts as outcome of a model with row effects, column effects, and interaction term capturing departure from independence, but for finally categorized mobility table, this implied hundreds of interaction parameters, making interpretation and estimation difficult. The log linear model for the observed count, that is 12, given by the equation. Now, if you can see the on the slide, the equation is mentioned where I index rows and j column, u1 and u2 are the main effects of the rows and the column. U12 is the interaction term measuring departure from independence. The difficulty with the log linear model was for social mobility and similar table is that number of parameter is too large for inference and interpretation. For example, in the United States data set, 17 categories were used. So, the interaction terms evolved 162 is equal to 256 parameters. So, the analysis of such large scale parameter was problematic. A successful general approach to modeling the interaction terms parsimoniously in the associated model of Duncan published 1979 and Goodman published 1979, that is a publication by Duncan and Goodman. They gave the model of association models. This is a model which refers to a family of models for analyzing pattern of association in contingency table, especially when rows or columns are ordered. Example, class education, occupational status. So, there is a relation between your education and your occupational status. So, this would reduce the number of columns and rows that was there in the log linear model. Now, the model developed by Duncan and Goodman are central to quantitative analysis of mobility and stratification in post-war sociology. This body of work helped establish the modern log linear and RC model toolkit as a standard for analyzing categorical data in sociology, especially in research on social inequality, education, and labor market outcomes. The other type of technique which was used for a collection of quantitative data where statistics was used has kind of thousands of data sets. So, with large samples, standard p-value test frequency lead to the rejection of the null hypothesis, even when the null model is theoretically reasonable and shows only trivial discrepancies with the data. The problem is exacerbated by the fact that sociologists often compare many competing models rather than just a pair. So, there is not kind of just one null hypothesis would be proved or disapproved, but here we have null versus alternative and therefore use stepwise or multiple comparison method, and this increases the risk of spurious findings. By the early 1980s, some sociologists addressed this by ignoring counterintuitive p-value and relying instead on the theoretical consideration and informal assessment of data discrepancies for model selection. Raftery, in his work published in 1986, suggests that model selection could be better achieved by using Bayes factor, which compares the probability of the data under one model to the probability of the data under another model. The Bayesian information criteria, which is the BIC, is equal to deviance, that is the degree of freedom log, and provides a simple large sample approximation. So, we have a refinement and critique of the BIC model as well, and this one was by Cass and Wasserman, and they showed that the BIS approximation is accurate when the prior on parameter is a unit of information prior. roughly equivalent to one data point worth of information, and this approach was extended from log linear to generalized linear models. So basically, if we look into this, the way in which there is kind of an evolution of the statistical method from moving away from the mobility study to using a number of variables to evolving a generalized linear models. Wicklian later criticized use of BIC, arguing that its implied prior may be unrealistically diffuse and can favor over simply models, suggesting instead that Bayes factor should be computed with prior that better reflects substantive knowledge, which is feasible for many sociological models. Now, if we were to look into the way in which sociology, statistics in sociology has been used, especially from 1940s onward, a general overall trend can be assessed. And these are, number one, there is more rigorous formulation of hypothesis. And second, there is a use of larger and more detailed data set. So, this kind of reduces the idea that sociology is only doing micro level study. They are large scale macro level study of the entire, say, the whole of the India where census data would be used. And then the third trend is the statistical models growing in complexity to match the richness of the data. The establishment of scientific rigor in sociology is comparable to many natural sciences. And one of the most significant trend in use of quantitative data is the advance of computing. So, in the 1990s with the Bayesian revolution, Markov chain Monte Carlo methods, these are some of the methods that were advanced in terms of using statistics, and these methods were a major driver for implementing the complex model for quantitative data analysis. So, if we look into the major achievements of statistics in sociology, we can understand that occupational status measures emerged as a key continuous scale advancing social mobility research that indicated about 1% annual increase in industrialized country. The use of computer in statistics or computer advancement transforms statistical application, enabling complex modeling. Before powerful computers, sociologists were largely limited to hand calculated cross tabulation and very simple models on aggregate data. For Raftery, that is the author of the study, this computational capacity is a key reason for the growth of post 1950 quantitative sociology. So, when we look into the idea of statistics in sociology, we can understand that it is important in terms of capturing the quantifiable data. And if we read the reference for this lecture, that is Adrian A. Raftery article published in 2000, that is Statistics in Sociology 1950 to 2000, published in the Journal of American Statistical Association, volume 95, number 450. This article is basically talking about the evolution of statistics in sociology and the significance of the three generation of research methods that has given rigor to the discipline of sociology. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.